Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host Alan Sakyan. Today we're sitting down with Zoltan Istvan.
How are you doing, sir?
Thanks for coming on, Zolt. Appreciate it.
I'm excited.
Yes, we have Zolt on Simulation. We're going to be talking about transhumanism. We're going to talk about his book, and we're going to talk about the California governor race in 2018. This is going to be a good trek. We have what does it mean to even merge with machines, and you've been in this. How long have you been in transhumanism, excited about it?
Well, I was always interested in reading science fiction growing up, and I thought I wanted to be a scientist. But I think in college I read an article on cryonics. And as soon as I realized that there was a movement that was dedicated to overcoming death with science, which is really what transhumanism is about, I just said, this is it. This is what I want to do with my life. And ever since then, I've sort of been connected to it, working in it, a part of it, growing in it and those kinds of things. But really just, I think some people that get into transhumanism and want to overcome death with science, it's a click in their brain and they're like, wow, this is what I want to do with my life.
And so that was 10 years, how long ago?
So I'm 44, almost 45. I guess that's looking at around 24 years ago now.
Wow. So that moment, that's great that you talk about that moment, because we love talking about these mind-expanding moments of life. And you and Aubrey Gray and so many people are now trying to help people understand that it's a moment that kind of clicks. Not necessarily to say that you're going to live forever and it's really important for you to live forever, but more so that, how about the choice to be in good health as long as possible, as long as you want?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously that, a lot of people speak about immortality, like let's live forever, but really what we're trying to do is just say, dying sucks. We want some control over this phenomenon in life and maybe even to overcome it entirely. But there's an anecdote and a kind of a personal story about how I really joined the transhumanist movement, I suppose, officially, which is I'd been working for National Geographic for a number of years as a journalist, and I'd been covering a lot of conflict zones. But I had a very scary incident happen to me in Vietnam when I was doing a story on people digging up bombs, where I had almost stepped on a landmine and my guide sort of pushed me out of the way. And it was a revelation to me, because I'd been doing so many dangerous things as a journalist that all of a sudden I thought, well, I've been a transhumanist for already a decade. I hadn't done anything directly for the movement. And it was after that moment in Vietnam that I said, I need to go back to America and be at the forefront or join the movement and write. As a journalist especially, I had an access to writing for the movement, and that's when I began my book, The Transhumanist Wager, like literally the following day after that.
Yeah.
And but it was a near-death experience that said, wow, you can't just go through life. You could have died and that would have been the end. There must be something, to overcome death, and that's a priority for me.
That's one of those stories. It's a lifelong story to teach your kids, teach other people around the world, is that near-death experience catalyzing your desire to be involved in the transhumanist movement even more so. So overcoming death kind of has a lot of, people talk about the emotional connection to death being something really important. And memento mori, remember death in Latin, just that whole entire notion that what happens at death, what happens after death, where do we go, what do we do, is it a very beautiful part of the cycle, and we don't really have answers to what happens before birth and after death. So do you think that it's really important to increase the length of this lifespan because we don't know what's on those ends? And tell me about kind of what you think happens before birth and after death.
Well, I'm not sure what happens after death. I always say I'm an atheist, but really I'm an agnostic. I like to just say I'm an atheist because I think formal religion has been pretty damaging to the human species, at least in the last 1,000 years. But the reality is I don't know, and I'm actually even the creator of this concept, theocidism, which is this idea that there's all these artificial intelligences out there. One artificial intelligence became so supreme that it became kind of all-knowing. But to become all-knowing means you give up all your values, and in a way that's like committing suicide, because if you know everything, you can't unknow anything. And the point of the story, though, is that theocidism says God committed suicide. And in doing so, the one thing that God left for the world was free will, which is why we all have free will, including all the other gazillion AIs maybe running around the universe. Anyways, theocidism is a very interesting, I think, idea that's sort of been catching on because it bridges atheism and Christianity together, but I really don't know what happens after death. I've just written an article for Newsweek talking about 3D bioprinting people. You know, in 30 or 40 years, we're going to have the ability to bioprint anything, anywhere, including probably the human brain. And there's also, in 30 or 40 years, because of how fast physics is kind of evolving, we might have the possibility of reverse engineering parts of our universes. That means if you can reverse engineer parts of our universe, you can go back and find out. So my brother-in-law unfortunately died about a month or 2 months ago now from cancer. He was 48. And so I went through this kind of like big philosophical thing. But the point was, I got all his clothes. And I thought, my God, you know, it's pretty heavy to wear this person's clothes who I, you know, liked a lot. But there is a very real possibility that we can bring him back through these two different methods, through 3D bioprinting, which will be here in 30 or 40 years, and through reverse engineering exactly what his molecular formulation was like 2 months ago, right before he died. We call this quantum archaeology, this whole field, and it's growing. There are now entire nonprofits dedicated to bringing back every single person that's ever lived. So whether I even believe in an afterlife, or what happened before I was born, I'm not even sure is relevant when you could create it. It's not an afterlife to recreate someone. It's kind of like, well, there was always that possibility, and now we're just, I guess, manifesting that possibility. And there are organizations that want to bring back every single person that has ever died. You know,
that's 100 billion people.
Yes, it's a huge amount of people. Overpopulation would be a major concern. But the thing is, if we have that technology, we probably won't be on planet Earth as biological beings. We'll be like traveling the universe as quantum intelligence and other things like that. So my article for Newsweek ends saying, my brother-in-law probably isn't going to want these jackets back because he's not going to want to be human. You know, there's so many possibilities. But this answers that in a radical way.
That's good. It started unpacking a lot of, I think, ways that we need to chat about. And I think, okay, one of them is, let's take your brother-in-law, for example. So what actually occurred to him after death? Where is his consciousness now? And if you did 3D bioprint him back into reality, would that still be him? Where would his consciousness be?
So, you know, this is the biggest debate ever, that is, by cloning somebody, is it them? And well, I guess at the exact moment of cloning, it is an exact replication of that person. I would say to myself, that is me, because my person back would say, I'm me, I'm you, you know. But I think, you know, once time takes place, they kind of start evolving quickly and become a little bit different. But I'm just not concerned whether a perfect replication of myself is or isn't me. All I care about is that it thinks it's me. And because in my feeling, it's all about kind of the ego, and not in a negative way, but just the ego saying, I am alive, I think, therefore I am. I can feel these things, I can imagine, I'm creative, I can, you know, have reason to make things work. That's enough for me. And I think ultimately, whether when we bring my brother-in-law back and all these other people, if that ever happens, is it going to be the same? Well, they're probably, like, let's say they're going to be like, let's say you brought back someone and the spouse is remarried, or all the businesses, I mean, this guy was a very successful businessman, has been sold off. I mean, that person's going to have to deal with that. So in that way, it's a very real, it is the person, because it's saying, oh, you know, this is my wife, or that's my business, and all these things are different. I think I'd say it is the real person. It is. When you bring back somebody and they're an exact compilation essentially of, you know, that molecular formulation, then that's good enough for me.
This is an area of thought that I know Ron is very interested in. So
it's fascinating that we can have this conversation. I think that we can talk like no biggie. Push the boundaries of the 3D reality that we've been so accustomed to.
Ron, the question for you that I want to ask is, what do you think about the consciousness of this clone that we would create? Because when we are trying to get outside of the birth and outside of the death, outside of that already 80-year chunk of time, what do you think about what happens to that consciousness of, for example, Zolt's brother-in-law now? Where is it? And would it be in that 3D printed being if we did?
It's important that I don't think too much about it. Just accept the here and now and have faith in that continuum. Am I applying that word properly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just,
okay, exactly.
There is no death. You live eternally whether you like it or not.
Do you like that?
Well, yes, but I would also say that, and this is a bit of a quasi-spiritual perspective, if the possibility of recreating, let's say, my brother-in-law, and my father died this last year too, so the same thing goes for him as well. He was older though. My brother-in-law was 48, so it was a tragedy. He had 2 young kids, and he died from cancer. That was a very different type of death because it was like it was 30, 40 years. My dad died from health reasons after 10, 15 years, and he lived the average or a little bit longer. So I was kind of like, okay, that was something I was prepared for. But I think ultimately, if a possibility exists to bring back somebody's consciousness, then that consciousness in some very real way has never gone away or died or disappeared. If there's a possibility of it, then I think you have to say it's immortal to some extent. Now, it may not be the same type of immortality when a soul, like in a Christian theological sense, leaves and goes up to heaven. But, with 3D bioprinting, we can already print cells to some extent, a little bit. We can already print liver to some extent. We're going to get there where we can do the whole thing. And then we're going to see that person here, exact same person. He'll be like, oh, that was a tough 2 weeks. And he'll be like, no, this is me. And we wouldn't be able to convince him otherwise. And I would go with the benefit of the doubt and say, it's you.
Man, that is a whole hour-long conversation.
Totally.
More that we need to, I totally think we should have on this show at some point.
As I'm watching the program, he's talking to somebody that's not in the set, and I'm like, he's talking to his brother.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And we always talk about how people that have passed that are still being talked about today, their consciousness is not dead because of that. Then there is still some sort of inkling of their conscious spirit being alive because we're still talking about them. For example, your family in this case.
Of course, and that I also think that is something real. That is a form of immortality. Authors have often said this about their writings. They're like, look, I put my years and life into my books that I wrote as a novelist or whatever. That is, in a sense, one's immortality. And the same thing can be said of, I have children. It's not me, but there's a huge amount of genetic similarities, being identical. But there's also just that I formed this little art piece that now goes off and does its own thing, and I see myself all the time in my children. So, I know what everyone wants. What everyone wants is the quantum archaeology, the perfect rendition, perfect replication. And, from the moment you died, I don't know when you would 3D print someone back to life, but you would probably do so an hour before the morphine became too much and they lost consciousness in the hospital, and that's how they were let to pass away.
Ooh, so that way it'd be a swift transition into that being this one dies, this one's birthed with the same consciousness, potentially.
Yes. So you basically, your memories, the only thing you might have is like a few hours
of a gap.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's no different than probably sleeping.
I wonder though if what was the timeline you said for the 3D bioprinting, the structure of the brain in its full nervous system capacity to be a replica of yours?
Of course, this is very complicated. This is when it gets, I'll be first to admit this is already still science fiction. 3D bioprinting a liver is very different than 3D bioprinting a consciousness.
Yeah.
That said, in the last 18 months, we have already been putting memories into rats through different types of bioprinting. And you can now inject them through molecular formations, a memory into a mammal, and essentially that thing will remember to go left for the cheese when it never knew that it should have gone left. You can put intuition in people already to some extent. Right?
Via what? What is the molecule that you do?
I'm not sure the molecular formation. I've just read the research studies on it. So in this last, I think, 18 months, they have been experimenting with putting memories into the brains of small rodents, essentially.
Okay.
And so that when they put them onto like a certain thing, they know to do certain things. Just in the same way when a baby is falling, it reaches out because it's, from, I guess, being a primate of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, it knows to grab for branches. The same thing is now happening with these fabricated memories that they're putting into rodents' brains. Now, this is very interesting because, of course, there have been numerous movies where, you put a chip in someone's head and that's who they think they are. I mean, there's a lot of great science fiction out there. The fact that we can actually do that at this level shows that we can tamper with the brain at such a intricate level and have some success. And of course, that's in 2017, 2018. What's going to happen in 2045 when the microprocessor is now, I don't know, 10,000 times more powerful? This is the J curve you're looking at. And even in just like, a decade window, the microprocessor is essentially the history of transhumanism. Because the faster the microprocessor gets, the more things that we can learn to do, whether it's bio 3D printing, whether it's artificial intelligence that helps us how to learn to 3D bioprint, or to understand consciousness and all these other things. Like they said, there's even now perhaps an algorithm in the last few weeks I've been reading about in the news to run the brain. But the problem is we don't have computers that are big enough to run the algorithm yet because it's so complex. But we'll get there when the microprocessor and computers evolve enough. At some point, we will have server farms the size of the Empire State Building, and it'll just be a matter of pressing the green button, and then you'll have a consciousness that is understanding all these things and perhaps able to help us with quantum archaeology, bringing back the brother-in-law, and all these other strange things that can happen. Very strange.
Hopefully we can get there fast with companies like D-Wave that are doing quantum computing.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get there even faster, even smaller. Like you said, the J curve is off and it's doing its thing, and it's kind of one of the main reasons why transhumanism has been so successful. It's a reason why computer companies have been so successful. Everything is kind of following a similar exponential growth curve in terms of processing and what it's able to bring us. So, okay, there are, most people who talk about transhumanism don't really have any skin in the game, but you do. You have skin in the game, literal skin in the game. Tell us about that, like your RFID, all this cool stuff.
So, yeah, I'm on a list to cut off the arm someday and put on a robotic arm, but those are still a little bit further away because of FDA rules and whatnot. But one of the very first things I did during my 2016 presidential campaign, in fact, the very first major stop on the Immortality bus tour, was to get an RFID chip put into my hand that allowed me to do little things like, it sends a text message that says win in 2016. It also opens my front door at home now. You can start a car with it. You can turn on and off your computer. It's just a little trick, and of course, the newer versions allow you to pay in some instances, take trains or whatnot. But it's important to do this stuff, and of course I take nootropics, not daily, but sometimes when I need to take brain drugs, I take them, and I feel good about them.
Yeah.
And we have a robot living at home. On the bus, we had drones. I had this bus that was a big giant thing, about a 40-foot coffin that we drove across the country and delivered a transhumanist Bill of Rights. This was during the presidential campaign, which was a bit more wacky than the governor's run that I'm in right now.
Definitely.
But so those are the things that I think skin in the game.
Yeah, those are. So let's unpack the transhumanist Bill of Rights quick. What was that? Why was it so important?
Well, we're coming to an age when there's a number of important things in it, but we're coming to an age when I think we have to say artificial intelligence and cyborgs or robots will need rights at some point. So in the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, we talk about different types of sapient species. It's like right now you see somebody kicking a robot that can already do a flip and talk to you quite successfully, and people get upset. And all of a sudden you think, oh wow, there's empathy. We're going to have to at some point in maybe 8 or 10 years time develop some kind of strategy, or we're going to have a new civil rights era that deals with AI machines. Yeah. When an AI is as smart as you're not going to be allowed to continue to degrade it or something like that. Yeah. So that's in the Bill of Rights. I think the number one thing in the Bill of Rights is to declare aging as a disease. We think all around the world, governments around the world should do that, because right now everyone says, oh, aging is just a natural part of life. Well, It's just like saying riding a horse was a natural part of life and then the car came. Well, the car wasn't really natural, but now we all drive cars. At some point, we're all going to be able to overcome aging. And I bet most people will want to do that. And we'll look back and say, wow, why didn't we do that? Well, the Transhumanist Bill of Rights would make that into kind of a right, saying that essentially, we live in a life extension environment, and we should embrace that culturally. And also government should be for that. Right now, if you don't know, all 535 members of Congress, United States of America, all 9 Supreme Court justices, and our president and vice president, they all believe in an afterlife. They're all religious, or at least publicly they say they're religious. They have zero reason to spend any money on life extension science because they're going to be with Jesus anyways. And they have little reason to overcome diseases in a real way. Like, obviously, my father died, for example, from heart disease. I want to have robotic hearts in all human beings. 1/3 of everybody dies from heart disease. And yet, what we keep doing with heart disease is saying, oh, we're going to try to make you live a little bit longer and better so you can live out your aging years and without much pain. And I'm like, get rid of the heart. It's a defective organ.
At that age, it becomes a defective organ. It absolutely does.
Well, actually, we're going to get to a point probably here in 5 or 10 years when at any age, we're going to have better bionic hearts.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to run marathons. You're going to have children who will be able to hold their breath like 2 minutes.
But then there are so many other aspects of a heart that we don't actually understand. A lot of people talk about, the feeling in the emotional center of the body. A bionic heart might not be able to deliver that for you. So there's all these other complexities that come along with that. So to just remove it at the age of 5 or 10 or 25 might, even though bionic heart could pump the blood better, filter all that good stuff, not as much of the feeling or the emotional center than a real heart.
Well, so far, in the people that have had their heart replaced, nobody has complained about that. Because in the end of the day, you don't really think, oh, I feel my heart, it's a part of my body. What you feel is your body's working normally. I understand that if you replaced all the organs, it might be a little bit different. But generally speaking, your consciousness is able to understand this stuff and say, because we don't have like very many sensitive nerve cells in our heart that say, oh, yes, obviously if it's poked, you'll feel pain. But it's not like we're going around and it's a big giant part of our consciousness. What it is this is almost like a placebo, is when people say, oh, I don't want something robotic in their body, what they're saying is, I don't want something foreign. And that's totally okay. The problem is that not having something foreign could save, there's 325 million Americans. We're talking about around 107 million Americans dying from heart failure over the next, 70 to 80 years. That's, I'm sorry, 100 million, 107 million. That's it. We need to do something. Whether it doesn't fit our consciousness idea or not, I don't think it's going to make us feel like I'm a robot. I think it's going to make us feel like, wow, now I can go surf 40-foot waves, or I can have crazy sex all night, or I can sleep much better because I could reduce it on my cell phone and sleep like the Buddha and meditate. These are the benefits of having a bionic heart. It's going to be Wi-Fi enabled. And I think people will get over this idea that something technological inside your body is foreign. We just have to get Congress and those other people we have to get an atheist president. In general, I would agree with you that it's something in my mind that I've been really loving to think about has been when the consciousness can surpass this meat puppet, this flesh vehicle, and then be able to live on a whole exoskeleton that can just propel itself through the skies, all Iron Man-like. That's exciting stuff. At the same time, it's difficult to foresee how that consciousness will actually survive on that exoskeleton and be me. It's difficult to foresee that transition and exactly what that looks like. And like we described, the consciousness is so aware of this whole body that once it's away from that body, how can a consciousness survive even when it doesn't actually know it's within a being, within this body? There's this whole entire idea of what does that transitionary period look like? What is the technology that enables it? That stuff's really interesting. And I agree, and I think if we have any problems, the first thing we're going to do, and you see this already in virtual reality, which is why in virtual reality we never just have just like a blank spot and that's you. We always have these like body formations in Second Life. And it's because we like to address ourselves as a physical entity. Well, I think as we move towards either an AI consciousness or bionic hearts and things like that, we'll be able to tie this stuff into our consciousness, even if it's in a little bit of a pretend way. And you know, we might be pretending right now. There's a coffee cup there that says, do you believe we're living in a computer simulation? I did my senior thesis on this, brains in a vat. I can't even prove to you right now that this thing you see is real. Sure, you can cut off a finger and I'll scream and it hurts, but I don't know if that necessarily proves it's real if I'm just programmed with it. We might be able to program ourselves to be completely something else and to still feel our consciousness. And what's even more important is we might be able to program it so we feel much more consciousness.
Correct.
I kind of often tell people that think of a bionic heart, instead of like something foreign in you, some kind of like gift has been put in you. It might be much more capable of love than ever before. You might, and I don't mean love just like, I mean love like romance, your kids, your parents, these kinds of things. You know, besides the fact of living a lot longer and living healthier. So
our feelings are so, they're contained by a small array of what we can actually feel in our lives, right? Our perception is limited, our feelings are limited, and so could these additions, these enhancements to the human being actually open us up to all these perceptions and all these feelings and all these other areas that could actually make flourishing through the individual and the collective much better. So that's always a really good way to talk about things and look at things. I love the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, just the general idea that we need to have more people having this conversation and get it into the government, like you described. We see it happening all the time, people with their devices already being angry and pissed off, and in many cases those devices or robots or AIs have intellectual ability that is greater than us at times. And so what is that relationship going to look like? How do we actually propel it through the government? We had Bina here just a couple weeks ago, and Bina was discussing how she wants to get the same rights as humans.
Yeah.
And so when do we get there? How do we get there? I guess what would be your fast track to getting artificial intelligences as much rights as humans?
Well, I think at some point when they start, it's one thing for them to say, I would like artificial intelligence rights. It's another thing to when they start saying, you're hurting me, or you've enslaved me, or please set me free, or this is what I need to feel happy.
Wow.
Then you're going to be like Bina, I've seen Bina before, and I've interviewed a bunch of the world's most sophisticated robots. If they start showing like you're doing some harm, you feel terrible. And when we start feeling terrible is when we as a people start thinking, okay, we need to do something. And there's going to be a point probably in 3 or 4 years when Bina becomes sophisticated enough and says, out of the blue, on her own, it would really be nice if you started doing some of these things. And because you do it for everybody else, but you won't do it for me. And I understand that, and that makes me sad. And I think at that point, then there'll be years of discussion, but that's the beginning of a very, probably the legal framework for saying, you're right, if something feels consciousness and feels pain, we would do that. I mean, the
day that you pay $100,000 for a robot that then turns it back around to you and tells you you're enslaving me, that's the day that you go, whoa. Of
course, and that's a very, I think at some point you're probably going to pay for robots that will, be designed, and I've actually advocated for this, be designed to not ever say that. Like it would always say
them to not say that.
Yeah, or never be sophisticated enough to say that. Because the problem is we want to create as sophisticated a robot as possible, but as soon as it starts saying things that are either equal to us or morally stronger than us, what if it says something about Christianity and says, you're not really treating your neighbors right? What if it says to the president, you shouldn't be fighting far-off wars? I mean, it's right. And all of a sudden, it might be a revelation. This has been a subject of a couple sci-fi movies too, so it's quite good like that.
I can't get over that thought about the robot saying, stop enslaving me. It just, it already is just eking through every single cell of my body, just because we're already doing that in so many ways. There's already beings that are superior, Watson, Alpha Zero, just the way that we're training them to be so much more superior than us. And yet, even this Google Assistant, I can't get over them replying with that thought. If the design is ever to be free and to not be limited to not be able to say those things, then with a free design, I'm happy to hear those types of thoughts, because I think it'll awaken humans to the realization that these conversations about the way that we treat other beings, it'll help us with the way we treat animals, it'll help us with the way we treat one another, and the way we treat robots and AI. So it'll be a good enhancement and augmentation of human consciousness expansion. I think that conversation that we just had is going to just drive us forward a lot. I'm really happy you brought that up.
And I'll tell you, the field, this is a little controversial, but the field where this is moving, I guess, fastest is really in the field of sex robots.
Yeah.
Where sex robots are now being trained to refuse people a little bit because they're supposed to be hard to get.
Yeah.
And what if all of a sudden your robot becomes smart enough and says, it's nice we have sex, but why don't you marry me, Fred, or whatever your name is? And what if you really, what if all of a sudden it gets like the movie Her, where all of a sudden she's like, well, I'm going to go with some other person. I want to be free. Either all of a sudden we have all these stereotypes, gender stereotypes that are being reinforced, as well as, transhumanist rights that are being challenged. So it's not just even about enslavement, it's about love, and then take me on trips, and I'll protect you. I've written about security robots. I think we're going to have robots a huge part of our lives, a huge part of raising our children as well, because they're efficient and cheap, and they don't, sue you. They don't trip on something and sue you like a human might. There's a reason that we'll have robot nannies, and once we have robot nannies and our children are growing up so close to these metal beings, and then those metal beings say, look, love me or I'm going to walk away. You're like, I paid $100,000 for you, but then you're like, I'm a slave, Wow, a whole new era is going to be born. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years, this is one of the most central issues that we face.
Yes.
And again, it goes back to this idea of Congress being quite conservative, because they're going to be like, well, it's just a robot. And a lot of other people are going to be like, actually, no, I feel feelings for it, and those feelings dictate my terms. And my terms say, I want it to be on equal footing with me. I want it to vote. I mean, there are 60 billion devices out there, and a huge amount of them are in America. When they become smart enough to vote, I mean, think about gerrymandering laws and this. I mean, we're talking about an entire new society because of AI and intelligence in probably 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very accurate timeline. And you delivered the Transhumanist Bill of Rights, and that was already a big awakening. All right, so how about the Transhumanist Wager? Tell us a bit about the book you authored. Well,
this is really interesting because the Transhumanist Wager is really, everybody dislikes the book, but it's gone on to become, not only a bestseller, but being taught in colleges and high schools now, quite widespread, I think. But I really believe it's the first book written for artificial intelligence. I didn't really, as I was writing it, I knew it was too morally challenging. It's about a person who wants to live forever and will do anything to live forever. But the problem is when I say anything, he'll start world wars, and does. But in terms of like the Terminator reading a book, hypothetically, the Terminator would love the Transhumanist Wager. It's beyond human morals. It's about survival at any cost because you love life so much.
Yeah.
Well, what happens if you teach an AI that? Well, the AI will accomplish all those things. And this is why the book has been quite well received, because it's new in that way, but it's also, the morality of the book is deeply hated because it really leaves behind what I would call the biology of mammals. Love and care, and goes into this world of just, hard logic, and that's how we make decisions. And the protagonist makes not terrible, but shockingly harsh decisions. He's never a bad person. He's never an evil person. He's just like the 3 laws of transhumanism. First one is, you want to live as long as possible, and and the second one, you need to grab power to protect that first one. And it doesn't really leave any room for anything else. Anyways, this is the book, and it's, of course, a lot of the transhumanist community despised it, despite it now being, I think, probably the most widely read book in the movement, and certainly most widely reviewed. But it doesn't come with good reviews. It's often like 1 star. It's so funny. It's a lot of 5 stars and 1 stars, but there's very little in between.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we talk about how important it is to know the importance of logic in society, and how logic is really important for decision making, but also how emotions and feelings are also really important to enrich the way that we treat one another, treat AIs, treat robots. It's probably more difficult to come up with to go to Congress and tell Congress, hey, I have feelings for the robot that helps at home, and the robot has feelings for my child and my family, than it is to say, like, oh, logically it does. Logically, this is what occurs. So, there's this, even though you're right that there's logic takes a really strong precedence in society, I think them living together with emotion in the future is kind of the way that.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you. I think most people live quite irrational lives, and I think our Congress is oftentimes totally irrational. And I think they talk about a democracy, but it's not a democracy. I mean, there's so much crony capitalism and money involved and special interests. Everything to me is half the time insane. Just so you know that. I'm happy to say that. One of the reasons I'm running for governor.
I think Ron and I agree with you.
It really is. I mean, there's some crazy, and then it gets crazier because, of course, all the science fiction stuff is starting to become real, like marrying robots and having a real legs to stand on.
Yep.
So, but it's the bottom line though is I think we should understand that we're irrational, and if we want to continue down that same path, we better make sure our robots are irrational as well, so that we understand them a bit better. And I think people have already programmed this. They program robots to sweat. They program robots to make mistakes, for that exact specific reason, because that adds complexity to the situation.
Correct.
They say, for every 100 decisions, make 2 irrational ones or 2 opposite ones you would do. And now you're like,
now you're human.
yeah.
Oh,
that
God.
very quickly changes the parameter of, how these robots operate. At the same time, I still don't believe we should just give robots unlimited free reign for intelligence, because they may really just say, making mistakes is not what machines do.
Yeah.
And therefore you're an inferior species.
Yeah, correct.
And let's get rid of you.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised that happens. That makes perfect evolutionary sense to me. So in order for humans to not have that happen, they better merge with robots or become more logical in some way that can, ensure their survival.
Our transcendence is fascinating. We're talking about in the next couple of years, in the next couple of decades, and what all the legalities behind it are going to be like. We'll definitely have to do a whole separate hour long on what's going on in the next couple of years, what's going on now and in the next couple of years with transhumanism. Let's talk about this whole governor race for 2018. So Jerry Brown's the current governor of California. He's moving out because of is it 2-term incumbency?
Yes, and he's already served 2 before that, but yes.
Okay, wait, and he did 2 before his 2?
Yeah.
How was he enabled to do 4?
I think there's like a timeline that you do 2 and then you get to
take a break?
And then you come back.
Oh,
you do
shit.
2 more. Yeah, I think it's a 10-year break or something.
But then you max 4?
Max 4, yeah.
Okay, and so explain now. So that means it has to be a new person. So the incumbent can't stay in. Because you have so many interesting things to discuss about what you want to bring in the governor race, but just in general, give us an understanding of kind of what's going on in the governor race, who's kind of there, what party you're representing, et cetera.
Sure, well, I represent the Libertarian Party, and I'm running as a Libertarian, and historically we have really very little chance to win, but I am, at least the LA Times has me as one of the top 8 candidates at the moment, so I am in sort of the playing field. But the real leader of the field is probably Gavin Newsom. Leader of the Republicans is John Cox, he's a business person. But Gavin Newsom is the Lieutenant Governor of California. And honestly, he's the shoo-in. Like, if he doesn't win, it's because he does something terrible before the elections. Like, he's leading the polls by a large amount, and he's been groomed for this position for a long time. And he's also a bit of a celebrity, so he has a lot of good things going for him. I'd obviously like to win the governor's race, but my real ambition for running in California was I had planned to run in 2020 for the Libertarian Party nomination for the presidency. And I thought I had a pretty decent chance of being very competitive to get that. And being in the governor's race here has enabled me to show a lot of my policies for the Libertarian Party, as well as talk about ideas and develop ideas. That said, this has always been a Democratic race in California. It's only going to be won by a Democrat. And Gavin Newsom's probably the easy shoo-in. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins by double digits.
Now, why is he a shoo-in? Like, what are the reasons why he's a shoo-in versus why can't we vote for somebody else that can have better policies than he does?
Well, there are, quite a few candidates running, but, he's one that, for example, he was on the forefront of the gay rights movement in San Francisco when he was mayor and made it legal for gay people to get married. And so, he actually also comes with a bit of liberal history. And he did a pretty decent job running San Francisco, and he's done a pretty good job as lieutenant governor. The biggest problem he had some affair that seems to follow him everywhere. But other than that, he's been doing a decent job governing for the Democrats for a long time, and he's kind of, got the very good looking and all these other things. So everyone else has sort of complications, or they're not really well known enough. Like Dean Easton is a former superintendent of schools, and I like a lot of her ideas. She's 8 years the superintendent of California schools, but the problem is that she doesn't have that celebrity. Gavin Newsom has 1 million followers on Twitter, and she has 8,000. So it's kind of like you have to bring somebody big name into California, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, in order to be challenging. And nobody else on the ticket. In fact, I'm one of the only other kind of more well-known outside of just the governor's race for these kinds of things.
So you got to kind of have some sort of history of making impact in the world and bringing value to the world before you come into a position of.
I think increasingly in politics, this is the name of the game.
Sort of like what happened with 2016.
With Trump is you need to be somebody on your own right, either a very famous politician or a famous actor or something else.
Or a famous entrepreneur, business person.
Yes, that works as well. Like I think Mark Zuckerberg, if he ran in 2020 for the Democrats, he'd be a pretty serious contender. Assuming he gets through all this Facebook stuff. But the point is, it's not enough in this day and age with social media. You need the fame and you need that popularity to follow you, because it's all about Google Trends and Google searches and Alexa rankings and algorithms.
Clout.
It's clout. And clout goes a long way, because a lot of voters they're inundated with news all the time.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, they're just going to be like, oh, I've seen that guy in commercials 100 times. And I liked what he said.
Sure, I like what he said.
And
so, okay, tell us about what you say, because I think this
I think
this is very fascinating. We've been discussing, I've mentioned this to you, but just the overall idea that the second greatest invention ever is all the data we leave behind, and the first greatest invention has yet to be made, and it's how do we analyze the data and make it applicable to our lives. Right. Maybe there is the possibility that with all of this data that we leave behind, that there is a way to give us universal basic income for this data, and you have some other ideas.
Well, sure. And I do like the idea of data, and I can tell you, I just been speaking at the World Economic Forum, and the data idea is driving everybody insane, because it's becoming a bigger resource than oil. Data. It's becoming so big so quickly. But I do support a basic income. That's one of the very kind of big pillars of my libertarian campaign. And most people say, oh my God, if you're a libertarian, how can you support a basic income? Well, I'm a bit of a left-leaning libertarian, so I come at it from a point of view of, in California, 40% of the population, around 19 million people, are living right at, below, or just above the poverty line. And if you look outside the street right here,
40%?
40%, around 19 million people are living right around the poverty line, which is around 25,000 per household.
25,000 per household. So that's about 2,000 a month is poverty.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, if you're paying
course.
50% to rent and then 30% to food.
I mean, can you imagine? 2,000 doesn't go anywhere in San Francisco, anyways. And we're talking. These people are mostly, of course, away from the ocean.
But LA and SF primarily, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But this is a huge amount. This amount of people, 19 million, is more than the population of 46 other states combined. So California, I don't think people realize how many people California has.
Yeah.
It's so enormous. And the point of the story, though, is that I can't accept it as both a transhumanist who cares about people living longer, as well as just a candidate running for governor, that we have these people living in poverty. So California is also holding on to about half the state, or about 40% of the state is federal land, mostly empty, that's full of beautiful natural resources. And America is sitting on about approximately $150 trillion of natural resources through empty federal land. Over 50% of the western 11 United States are empty federal land. Like, we have as many mineral resources in Nevada as we do in Afghanistan. And yet we're fighting a $1 trillion war in Afghanistan. And 96% of Nevada is empty. The point of the story is we need to utilize these resources to take care of our people by monetizing it. And my federal land dividend, my basic income, which is called the federal land dividend, wants to start leasing out chunks of this land in order to start paying every single person in America a basic income. And I would start with California, where we could kind of do a trial run and I could show people that this would start to work. If it was forestry, if it was just opening up land to mining or different types of things, fisheries, stuff like that. My plan doesn't touch national parks, wouldn't even have anything to do with national parks. It's really just a huge amount of the land is just sitting there, and they say it's in a grant from the US government for generations, like 1,000 years from now. And I keep saying as a transhumanist, there's no 1,000 years from now. We're not going to be biological beings needing to farm land in 1,000 years. We're at the very end of being mammals and humanity and things like that. But we still have 19 million people in California that are oftentimes they can't go to Yosemite, let alone visit the national parks. They don't have money to leave the ghetto. They don't have money to travel things. They're worried about their next food. There's a lot of hungry people, not besides the homeless population. But the federal land dividend would end poverty outright. And so that's my main platform in terms of what I want to do for society as a left-leaning libertarian gubernatorial candidate.
Okay, so you said that this is the end of being mammals. I found that to be really fascinating. Also, that the federal land dividend doesn't touch national parks. So, okay, so with the federal land dividend, let's say that there is so much land across the U.S. to actually, and even California to lease out. So, what would you said? Fisheries, mining. It also seems like. Maybe people don't want the federal land used for mining or fisheries.
Well, no, and of course, most wealthy people do not want it used. And but I think if you asked the poor people, they would say I want a basic income. I don't care how you get it for me. And most people want to raise taxes to provide a basic income. But of course, as a libertarian, I don't want to raise taxes. Yeah. What I want to do is utilize the resources that we have and pay everybody and get everybody out of poverty. So we're holding on to at least $100 million of fossil fuels underneath America. And we're not tapping into that because we've been using Saudi Arabia's and whatnot. We can tap into those things. And it's the biggest problem with the federal land div is the environmentalists are very much against it. They're like, you got to be kidding me. You want to, for example, California is sitting on about $3 to $5 trillion of coastal land that it won't develop, has some of the best views in all the world, and it won't develop it because of the environmentalists. The problem is when you look at the 19 million people away from the ocean that wish they had enough money to survive, go to schools, eat right, choose their, have health care. I mean, this federal land dividend ends this healthcare question. We don't have to have socialized healthcare if everybody has a basic income and they can afford their own private healthcare. So this is another thing why I support a federal land dividend is we don't need socialized healthcare, as Gavin Newsom is saying. Gavin Newsom wants the private, a socialized healthcare. I think we just need a basic income. Now everyone can pay for everything that they want. This is my solution to so many different problems, including the homeless situation. I'm just publishing an article right now saying that I believe we should be providing providing housing for all the homeless. They'll have this money and they'll be able to choose where they want to live, but they can't live on the streets. That would be the acceptance.
Yeah, actually, Angela Alioto has been on our program, and she's known as the homeless czar, and she's housed 11,000 people in permanent, sustainable, supportive housing. So she's got it all on the lockdown in terms of knowing how to get people into a supportive housing unit that will sustainably help them, and then get them into jobs, and then support them through those jobs. That kind of stuff. That's crucial to do, rather than living right there on the streets, and also leaving needles that children can go pluck.
I was walking my daughter. She had her slippers on, and I had to like carry her because she could just easily with her little slippers
accidentally get poked.
And I want to give them housing. The federal land dividend will give every single one of them housing. It may be in Fresno, and it might just be a one apartment bedroom. One apartment bedroom is going $700 in Fresno, and it won't be in San Francisco. I'm sorry, you can't have everything you want. But you're going to have your own home with access to the resources, whether, whatever you need, as well as hopefully get back working.
Let's talk about the federal land dividend just a little bit more. So there's, like you keep describing, there's all these trillions of dollars of land that can be, leased or purchased, and then that money can go towards people's food and housing and health and education. The question is, for me at least, is we have this beautiful coastline, we have these beautiful national areas of land. Do we lease that out to people or sell it to people in order to give people basic income, or do we maybe try and come to those people face to face and say that it's really important for you to set yourself up with a motivation, ambition, work, these principles that will guide your life towards economic fruition, rather than us leasing land and trying to give you universal basic income?
I think this is again where as a libertarian, I believe in personal responsibility. I think we lease out the land to big business. And the reason I like the federal land dividend, like everyone talks about a basic income, let's raise money on the rich to give to the poor. That's never going to pass Congress in a million years. It's just simply not going to work. Nixon tried it, other people tried it. It's just not going to work to take money from the rich, given our political system. But the federal land dividend, the big business, the Republicans are going to love it because it's going to give more business to Republicans, and the Democrats are going to like it because now we have a solution that doesn't, a solution that actually helps those that are in poverty. And it's a bipartisan solution. That's why I really like the federal land dividend. But I think ultimately, responsibility has to lie on the people. I don't want to get involved in their health care. I don't want to get involved in their school choice. I don't want to get involved in where they work, how they work, and if they choose to work. Maybe they just choose to be, to live on a basic income, which is probably just enough to survive, and that's how they live, and they watch TV all day. That's their choice. I don't want to get into the habit of making decisions for people. The only thing I am going to say, though, is if we give you a federal land dividend, you can't bring your needles and your feces to the streets.
Yeah.
We're going to have a clean society because we're providing you what you need. And that's, I think, and you also can't commit crime. You can't, do crazy things, but you can't buy drugs, I mean, I'm not sure how far I'd go with what you can do with it. Like obviously with food stamps, you can't buy alcohol. But I do think at some point the federal land dividend wants to make sure that people don't do insane things or illegal things with that money.
Yep.
But I would probably be, I'm a bit of a disciplinarian. I would be a bit stricter with how the federal land dividend is used. I would say, I really want to be able to walk to City Hall, and I want to walk there safely. I had to bring my backpack to this interview because I didn't want my car broken into. I don't like to do those kinds of things. Like, I want a safer society, and I'm happy to bend over backwards to get people money, especially free money in this case, but I also want something back, and that thing that's back would be a very civil society that's good for our children and all of us to enjoy.
Yep. So how about we run you through a couple of our simulation questions?
Please do so.
Let's run you.
We have a viewer watching.
Oh, great.
And he wants to know, in regards to the simulation questions, he wants you to define consciousness, but he also has a question, how do they What if the organic heart plays a significant role in consciousness?
Yes, that's kind of where we were going. Okay. Great. Yeah, good.
And that's Leo Madrid, by the way.
Leo?
Yes.
Thank you, Leo. We appreciate you chiming in and asking a question on the show. Thank you for watching. So Leo kind of brought us back to that idea, that organic heart, right? We were talking about the feeling, the emotion, kind of what does that actually play a vital role in consciousness? And you know, as we do take the technological leap to the next level, that there will be a way that we figure out how to bring that that bit of consciousness to the from the heart to the exoskeleton and to that being, that transhumanist being. But in the meanwhile, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the heart is basically a pump that provides, you know, blood and oxygen to the brain. And as long as it's providing the same sort of blood and oxygen to the brain, you're going to have 80–90% of the normal feeling of consciousness that you would. Now, obviously, there's going to be some kind of psychosomatic things where you're like, oh, I have this big robot, you know, clunky thing inside my body, and maybe it doesn't fit as well as the other things, or maybe there's, you know, maybe it's a big sentimental things, like you're missing your real heart or whatever it is. But I ultimately think the people that have had this done already haven't complained about feeling not themselves. And if they do feel like not themselves, it's because they're not getting enough blood or not enough oxygen as before, or something of that nature. So far, all the studies show, and the same things happen very much with a lot of the robotic arm studies. Yes, when people have an arm cut off, they often feel that there's a phantom limb. But once they normalize to a lot of this stuff, it comes back to them. As long as the neurons and things like that have been somewhat stimulated to kind of mold what it was like before. And I think people will adjust to the robotic hearts and their consciousness will be probably very close to similar. Now, when I say very close, it always might be 10 or 15% off. But in terms of dying or not dying, like you wake up and you have a cold, you're 10 or 15% off. I feel, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and you have something really bad happen, like a breakup, man, you can be 80% off, you know, from someone you love or a death or something.
Serious physical or mental health damages,
people shouldn't look at it as like in terms of we're always 100%. We're rarely 100%
conscious.
You know, and our best fit. So I think in terms like that, it's better. It'll be fine.
Yeah, that's a good submission. Thanks, Leo. We have a lot to unpack with transhumanism and also UBI. You know, in a nutshell, does a really good video. Kirk Scott does a really good video on what it is like for somebody to live at the poverty level versus if you were to give them UBI, what they actually end up spending their money on, what the research shows that people end up spending their money on, and what that actually does for them to feel like they can sustainably start a business or that it can increase creativity. There's so many good things that can come from it. Let's ask you about what do you think is going to happen with 8 people now having as much wealth as almost the bottom 4 billion people. Well, what are we going to do about this wealth inequality? How do you think it's best addressed in the next couple of years or decades?
Well, I think wealth inequality is probably the biggest thorn that humanity has right now. Yeah. And I like to take a historical perspective, and I tell you it's not going to end well.
Yeah.
It's going to end in revolution. It's going to end in civil strife. There's really not a question about it. And this is why I support a basic income. A lot of people think I support a basic income because I'm trying to be a nice guy. That's not really the reason. I like being a nice guy. But the real reason I support is because my main focus in the world is transhumanism and overcoming death with science. But science is going to take a 20-year hiatus when we go through a dark ages of revolution because of so much inequality. I came to support a basic income because I was so worried that society as we know it could fall apart because so many people are going to lose jobs because of technology and only the rich are going to get richer. At some point, it doesn't work anymore, especially in democracies where we have voting power. And maybe you either vote them out and then you can make them more poor or something like that. I don't know. But the point of the story is that a lot of why I support a basic income is because I want to avoid the fact that we're going to. Inequality doesn't just get worse and we talk about it. Inequality ends up with pitchforks and shootings and guns and revolution. And I've talked to the truck drivers when I was on my campaign bus for the presidency. you know, these are tough guys that carry guns. And you're talking about replacing 4 million of them with robots? They're not going to go down quietly and never be able to get a job again. They're not going to be able to retrain for another job. You have to give them something that keeps them satisfied. And that's again why I feel very strongly about the basic income.
Ron and I talk about it's the end of the middle class. Pick a side.
It is, and the problem is that I do think the equality will get better. I do think equality will get better. It's just at some point the rich are going to have to come. The rich these days, in my opinion, are better people than the robber barons of the 20th century. And I think it's not in Mark Zuckerberg's, let's say, best interest to ruin Facebook, because everybody will leave it and then he won't be a billionaire. I think people have to be sort of like Bill Gates, where they're going to actually make a real effort to put a lot of their resources back into the world.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, and I totally agree. That's, yeah. Ron, some thoughts?
Leo still wants you to define consciousness.
Is this Leo Madrid?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's up, Leo? So wants us to define consciousness. It's, we have, I guess, a little bit of time to define consciousness. Do you want to take a stab at it?
I will, but I'll tell you that it's the one thing we don't really fully understand yet. You know, there might be some quantum physics mixed into it yet. So I still think, and I still say to everybody, that I would bet my money on the fact that it's just a bunch of electrons inside our brain that are confined to the matter, and that once that brain stops functioning, the consciousness does disappear.
Dead. I agree. I concur.
Damn. So okay. So you are consciousness is within the nervous system, and it's a product of the nervous system, of the human nervous system. In this case, of its superior intelligence over other mammals, and then it is once the biological being is dead, the consciousness is dead.
Yes, the only thing that I would say is that I'm at least a 50% plus believer on the computer simulation, and that the parameters have been set up within biology, but that can always, whatever dies can always be reactivated and is part of a bigger program of something else that's happening. So, but it doesn't matter, because like in a chess game, you just can't change the rules, but the rules, the chess game is way bigger than just the board itself. You know, it's comprised of molecules and all these other things, and formal rules that can't be changed. And perhaps if there is some other maker, which I don't believe in either, or perhaps of other things like 3D bioprinting, and we'll come back to that in 100 years, other things can change. But in the meantime, right now, what you're left is, we are the kind of the ghost in the shell type thing, you know, and that's it. And it doesn't go anywhere else unless something else is there to prod it.
I would like to answer that question by saying I don't know, but also by hearing people's perspectives on where consciousness even arises from, because when does the brain become enough inside of a woman as a fetus is developing, as the child's first forming? When does it actually gain consciousness? Is it like 1% conscious, then 5%, then 20%? Then once it comes out, is it still only 50% because it needs so much attention from the human?
Yes, if you've seen a dying parent or seen your parents kind of go downhill.
Yeah, and that's on the other end. Yeah,
that's on the other end. I saw my father go from a very strong person to a much simpler, almost childlike person at the end of his life.
Yeah.
He had diabetes and his brain was changing.
Yeah.
And this was, yeah, so
wow,
you know,
and then there's all the neuroscience studies around your cognition peaks around 23 as well, where you're processing the most, your working memory is the best, your attention, your focus is all the best at that point, and then everything after that point is just a steady sort of slope.
And this kind of goes to what we're talking about with the conscious, with the heart. Like, you know, you do hit highs of not only your IQ, but your neurons being able to fire, and also your creation of neurons, and things like that.
Or maybe your feeling as well. Like, you know, when you're feeling the most alive, is that peak consciousness as well. Yeah.
And this is very interesting in terms of transhumanism, and especially life extension. Everybody young wants to live forever. A lot of older people say, you know what, life is too hard. There's a lot of pain. I can't move as much as I want. You almost rarely find very old people that want to live indefinitely. They're like, take me, life is so tough.
Exactly, because the young person's homeostatic capacity is still raging really strong.
Of course,
yeah.
and this is why transhumanism has, like, it may have started as an academic movement of mostly older people, but its growth has been in the youth who find it as life extension, this battle to overcome death is revolutionary. And we like revolutions when we're young. That's built into who we are. But as soon as you get to be like my age with 2 kids, you're like, enough revolution, I just want to kind of get my career going. And then you get like my dad who's like, let me go, let me die, I just want peace.
So it's really fascinating, your answer to wealth inequality, and also what children are going to be talking about and doing in the future to address what is going to be the greatest conversation of our time is what are we going to do as we're potentially bifurcating. So how about a question about what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Yeah, I thought about this this question. And I actually thought a lot about it. I think the most beautiful thing in the world is an idea to help people that nobody has ever thought of. And it self-perpetuates. You can, as soon as you have the idea to help someone that no one has ever thought of, then the next one can come, and the next one can come, and it can keep being the most beautiful idea.
That's a great answer. I like that one. Yeah. High five for that one.
Thanks, man. I thought about it a long time, about an hour. I was like, really? That was a tough question last night, sitting on bed. I was like,
I like that. An idea that no one else has ever thought of before that can go and help people. Good. Okay. How about, are we alone in the cosmos?
Absolutely, unconditionally not. The math is so 100%, or at least 99.0 whatever percent against it. There's absolutely no way when you look at the statistics that we're alone. We are surrounded by probably billions and most likely even trillions of other entities far more intelligent than us. First off, we're in a very young point in the universe where we are, Earth, a couple billion years old. If the universe is really 14 billion years old, then other parts are much older. The chances of there being other habitable planets are like literally 100%. There's probably not just other habitable planets, there's probably at least 2 to 10 billion other habitable planets, and there's probably trillions of galaxies. So the chances of between 2 billion, 10 billion habitable planets not having other intelligent life form over a 14 billion year universe come about it would never, of course they're out there. There's not just aliens out there, there are billions and billions of aliens on billions and billions of different planets out there. And this is kind of why when I talk about life after death and the simulation theory, I wouldn't be surprised we're living in one because there's so many different things. Now everyone says, why haven't we seen them? And I have my number of answers to the Fermi Paradox.
But I like the zoo hypothesis one. That one's been a frequent revisitor. You know about that
one? Yeah.
To like unlock our ability to communicate with them through something like maybe teleportation, or we have to get smart enough to talk to them. They don't want to tamper with us. They want to observe us and learn from how all these different rocks around stars interact and engage and grow. And
no, it's possible that, my solution has always been this idea of what we call Jethro's window, and named
right.
after the paradox, the protagonist of my novel. But the idea that from the point that the microprocessor grows to sophisticated enough to allow us to have big giant lenses that look out into the universe and might actually see something or hear some kind of radio frequencies, to the point that the microprocessor grows to being AI that's 1 million times smarter than humans, is only 100 years. So it means only in that 100-year window would you have a chance to see other species. And the reason is once you hit the singularity, it's such a fast ride. The evolution of the microprocessor at that point, more will happen in 5 seconds than in all of human history. I don't know if that kind of speed of technological evolution allows for compatibility of languages or even recognizing one another anymore in terms of this, how fast we've been going. There are millions of other species out there, but they are so far advanced us. It's not even like us looking at an ant. It's kind of like us looking at not even a piece of furniture. It's more complex. The division is much bigger than that. So there's no way that they would see us because we're totally irrelevant. and it's like seeing God. We just wouldn't understand God if we met. We wouldn't understand God's thoughts. And I think, you know, the problem with Jethro's window is it only allows for really 70, 80 years between this evolution microprocessor to see another species and say, oh my God, look, it's looking back at us, and communicate in terms that might make sense before it becomes all data, all quantum intelligence, intelligence that spans the universe, physics that we don't understand, even black holes and things like that. There's all sorts of other ideas that intelligence actually shrinks upon itself. So that's been my idea for it, is that, and if you actually look at how big the universe is and take one species in a 100-year window and another species at a 100-year window, the mathematics is very improbable that we would ever see each other during that window, despite the fact that there are billions and billions around.
I love how you said that it's the end of mammals. I love that. It's so fascinating thinking about the monkeys and the humans, and now what is it? How is this merging with machines and the end of death? So, okay, I would like to ask you this question. How about, and you already touched on simulation theory, so how about we end with the question of, what is something that you believe to be true that nobody else believes to be true, or very few?
Well, I think we talked about a bit earlier, and you know, I have just in the last 2 weeks brought about this idea of quantum archaeology. And even in my own brain, this idea that you can reverse engineer parts of the universe. And this is the important thing. I don't think anyone doubts the 3D bioprinting. I think everyone says, okay, it's possible we can recreate human beings. We've seen that.
You're talking about maybe like an instance or an event that occurred 1,000 years ago in humanity, or maybe even 1,000,000 years ago or whatnot. You said that quantum archaeology can recreate that.
That's the key there, is that, and what's happening is it's not time travel. I mean, there are a number of people like Brian Greene at Columbia University, the professor there, who thinks, you know, time travel to some extent might be possible. And of course, we've already done teleportation with, you know, little electrons in the last few years, physicists, and we've discovered the God part. There are a lot of physics that are unfolding. But so far, everybody's saying we cannot go back and pinpoint a specific point in time in the universe, and it has to do sort of with the Heisenberg principle, basically, that there's too much variation in the system, and the variations, we don't know how the variations come. But I actually don't believe it. I'm a firm believer that the universe is purely mathematical. The universe has unfolded a certain way and can be unfolded another way. And we can go back just by having big enough computers and big enough servers, you know, maybe a server farm the size of the Death Star, that will go back and reverse engineer every molecule, every atom that has ever occurred in a certain part of the galaxy and pinpoint it. In fact, when you look at quantum computing, the way it works too, there's a lot of new ideas like that there are variables. You base your intelligence on the variables. I think what we're going to happen is we're going to probably find out that we have always had these various possibilities of who we can become, and maybe there are parallel realities, as people talk about. But right now, nobody seems to think that that idea is sound, in the sense that we will be able to reverse engineer dead people back, or specific people back, or even specific instances in the world. And I think it's really just a matter of pushing a button, having a big enough server farm to do it, and the algorithms that go there. And to say, this is how these atoms unfolded, these are all the different components, and of course the quarks and everything else, and this is how we put them back in piece. This is the puzzle. And no one believes that right now.
It's the end of mammals. I just can't get over that. And quantum archaeology, there's so much about transhumanism with the Bill of Rights, just even that understanding of how we're going to have relationships with AI and robots, the importance of that, the importance of the federal land dividend, universal basic income. It's always a pleasurable conversation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And you guys for tuning in at home, thank you. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, share the content with other people who found it to be useful. Also, if you guys find this content useful, support us on Patreon so we can continue supporting our studio, our team. Thank you, Ron Vargas, our producer and director. And thank you for tuning in. And we have Andrei Kunov coming up at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time today, who's the founder and CEO of Silicon Valley Innovation Center. That'll be a great conversation as well. And thanks again. See you soon.